All right, so let's take a look at our day by day for PFT 102. So this is PFT 102, which is going to be essentials of, or no, that's not what it is. It's OPT for sport specific training, which is another classic, like old Sochi name that kind of doesn't make any sense. OPT for sport specific training. So that's the name of our class here, PFT 102. At least I believe that's the official name in the catalog. I always call it program design : sports because all the program design classes kind of have silly names. Uh, and that's way easier to remember. But anywho, so this is going to be a 10-day class, just like any of our other program design classes. We are going to be doing a lot of like double chapters in this class, kind of similarly to how we did in our other program design classes. So today we're going to go through chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1 is very brief. It's literally talking about how it's like NASM's great, traditional training is not so awesome. We're awesome, like it's very much just like kind of weighing the differences between how NASM approaches sports training versus like traditional people who approach training, which is like work out hard and it'll all work out. So we'll talk about being very specific there. And then we'll move into human movement science, which again is going to sound pretty familiar considering that we have had our kinesiology class, we had PFT 101, which is our assessments class. Like we're going to revisit just all of those terms very briefly today. Then on Friday, tomorrow, we will dive into sports performance testing, which is getting into the assessments side of the sports world. Very, what's funny about that is like that assessment stuff is going to look exactly the same as like how we've studied it in the past. I mean, we just had an entire class on assessments and we only have like one little PowerPoint to kind of, land on for just a second in this course. So we're going to move through that, pretty quickly, but it'll be cool. It'll have like, it'll talk about like a lot of performance assessments that we might not necessarily have done, like, a 40-yard sprint or a 5-10-5 drill, which are all those really fun little agility drills. A lot of the stuff you see in like the NFL Combine, actually, we'll talk about that. And I only use that as an example because the NFL Combine is like the only example that I can really think of off the top of my head that's like a, it's like tryouts. And a lot of other sports don't like take the time to like show that stuff. Like I love watching like, I don't care. It's funny. I don't care about the draft. Like I don't enjoy watching like any version of any draft. I just like prefer it like once the season starts. But I love like catching some of the NFL Combine stuff because it's just so fun to watch people like compete in these really cool, performance assessments. So we'll talk about like some of those. We'll talk about like 5-10-5s, and we talked about the Wingate test and things like that in our assessments class. But we'll touch on that again here, and we'll talk about like what certain movements mean and overactive, underactive muscles, and that'll pair really well with where we're talking about flexibility on our second day as well, because it'll be like, all right, if you observe these overactive muscles, here's what to kind of stretch out. So we'll do a quick refresher on that. And then that'll be homework 1. Then we're going to dive into like we're moving through our OPT model, core cardio and core training. So we're going to put cardio and core together. I don't know. Maybe I'll move those things around, but that's the one that kind of makes the most sense. So we'll go through that program design like we have in the past. This is so interesting because normally I do these breakdowns for a group of students who are brand new, but we didn't get any newbies this month. So like, a lot of me is just saying like we're doing it just like we did last time. Then we got balance and plyometric, aka reactive training, followed by homework 2. Again, covering those each individually before kind of putting them all together. Now in this course, we finally get to do SAQ training. Like a lot of times in our program design classes, we've kind of moved through SAQ really quickly. Now we're really going to break it down. Like how do you train for speed? How do you train for agility? How do you train for quickness? What's the difference between those drills? How do you incorporate them separately? And then how do you incorporate them together? And then we'll get into day 6, which is really fun. It's got resistance training like we've talked about in the past, nothing fancy there, but then we're also gonna tag on Olympic lifting. And a lot of times like people will think of Olympic lifting and they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna learn how to deadlift and barbell squat. And that's like, surprisingly, that's not part of Olympic lifting. Olympic lifting is actually only 2 events. Don't get me wrong, like those components are part of these movements. But Olympic lifting is actually an entire, like, let's call it a whole sport of its own, right? In the same way that you have basketball, baseball, and football, Olympic lifting is its sport. But baseball consists of offense and defense, and you know, same thing with basketball and football. Olympic lifting consists of 2 things: the clean, the power clean, and the snatch. And that is it. That is the whole sport of Olympic lifting. It's those 2 movements. But those movements are incredibly technical and involve like a lot of other components, right? So when you talk about like doing a power clean, like that's a very similar hinging motion to like a deadlift. When you talk about like doing a snatch, that's a very similar motion to like an overhead squat. So we'll look at that finally, which will be really, really kind of fun for a lot of people to kind of break down. Then we're going to get into periodization. This gets its own day here, which is always kind of surprising for some people, but periodization will be where we do our big chart. So that's the day. Actually, I should put that down there because it's always good to let people know. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, no, we're not. I'm sorry. No, we will do, we're moving, I wanted to move big chart to the end here. So periodization is actually where we're going to finally dive down. Like, okay, how do you know how to move your client through whatever phases of the OPT? So like if you had a client who's focusing on weight loss and it's January and you've got until July to get them to drop a few pounds for a vacation that they're going on or something like that, right? And they hire a trainer because they want to look really awesome. Cool. It's January. You got till July. That is X number of months. So then you would break down like where you're going to go over those X number of months. Like you want to make sure that you have a plan when you're moving through into February and then into March and then into April, right? Like, you know, you don't want your client to plateau. So we'll talk about, how plateaus are associated with like getting stuck in, you know, one style of training. Periodization is a great way to break that up. So it's like, we're going to focus on stabilization here, strength endurance here, back to stabilization, back to strength endurance. And then that'll cover about 4 months. Then right as we are getting into, you know, that final little bit there, the home stretch before it's time, we'll do a little bit of hypertrophy training. So we'll go into phase 3, build a little bit of muscle, focus a little bit less on calories, and then we'll burn anything that we might have gained during hypertrophy off, and it'll be real toned looking come, you know, come the cruise or whatever. So that's kind of periodization in a nutshell. Or like if you're training athletes, right, and like the season starts here, we'll talk about like the difference between like on-season and off-season training. Also, the smaller version of periodization, we'll get to break down like what it looks if you're training a client like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll talk about training splits in periodization, which is always a really important conversation because there's a million ways you can do training splits. It just depends on how you're laying your volume out. The more often you're training, the easier it is to spread your volume out over a longer period. So that's what we'll get into on day 7. I'm excited for that one. And then we'll get into injury prevention, which is kind of cool. Obviously, there's a lot of injuries that are commonly associated with like athletics. So we'll look at like what causes ankle sprains, you know, and you guys a lot, we've already talked about that in PFT 101. A lot of that information is going to sound really familiar. It's like, oh yeah, the flat feet, right? That puts you at a higher risk for an ankle sprain, you know. Adducted knees, that puts you at a higher risk for an ACL tear. So we'll look at those things, and then again, it'll be common ways to kind of address those things, like, you know, balance training, flexibility training, strength training. And then finally, on days 9 and 10, just like before, we are going to have day 9, which will be a training session practical. So we'll get on a call and I will break down the big chart, and which will go a little bit faster because we don't have any newbies. So we'll kind of move through the big chart pretty quickly. But then we will also break down our training session practical. In this course, it's very different than any of our other practicals. Like our other practicals, we usually had you guys designing OPT models. In this course, and this sounds really intimidating, but don't let it be freaky. You're actually going to break down 12 months worth of training. So you're going to do an entire year. You're not making an entire year's worth of OPT models. I'm not like a psychopath trying to get your brain to explode. Plus, planning that far ahead is never effective anyways. It's actually planning too far ahead. But knowing what phases of training, that's one of the, like, going back to our sales technique from yesterday, one of my favorite things to do is to pull up those charts. So take a look here, NASM, this is not gonna be the right, I need my download, we'll just downloads. So we're going to break down like how to set up training templates over the course of the year. Annual program design. So it's this little, oh, that's the wrong one. Annual program design, that's also the wrong one. There it is. So let's say you want to, like, we have our cruise person, like boom, 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 boom. And there we go, right? That's a great way to kind of get them prepped for, like, that's what phases we're moving with. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right? If you're training like an athlete in general for just general sports performance, phase 1 is really good because obviously we always need stabilization. Phase 2 is really good because endurance is huge in athletics. And phase 5 is really good because power sort of obviously also really important for athletics. So then you literally could just go like this. And that's a pretty good year right there. Then we have, like, let's say you get a client who's like a power lifter, right? And so they are interested in just getting their deadlift and barbell squat and bench press as strong as possible. When you do a lot of like phase 1, endurance is not really all that key. So you're probably going to move into 3. Now, 3 is not also all that necessary. Like hypertrophy is not huge when it comes to like power lifters, but we can kind of use that as our endurance-y side, like our intro, without going in straight into super high intensities. But then once your clients are like established, we get into that super high intensity stuff. Now we maybe go back there, and then we can kind of reset halfway through the year, back into stabilization. Boop, 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 boop. And there's like a year's worth of like power lifter. So a couple different ways, you know, there's a lot of options that, why am I undoing all that? It doesn't matter. Then we have our breaking it down weekly, right? So like, let's say like we are in January, I would go down here and be like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Those are our days. It'll be upper body day, lower body day, upper body day, lower body day, with cardio on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And then, you know, each week kind of looks like that. If I've got like a weird staggered week situation where it's like I'm going to have them lift every other day, maybe it looks something like this. And so like their training days change every week, from Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that's really great. Personally, I absolutely despise doing that. I can't stand working out on different days of the week every week. I like to know what my Monday is going to be every single time. I like to have a lot of consistency there, because of Frisbee being always on a Saturday. If my entire Frisbee group would change and like fluctuate, then I'd be willing to do this. But personally, I hate this style of training. But then we also like set up our reassessment for our final day, right? When we meet on that final Saturday, we'll do a bunch of reassessment stuff. That way, come the next month, we can do, you know, strength endurance stuff. And so maybe that version, you know, we get rid of all this. We move 1 month forward. Oh, sorry, we aren't doing strength endurance. We're moving straight to hypertrophy. So maybe that day we want to break down, you know, a 3 on, do a little bit of cardio, right? And then take a day off, and then kind of a same concept here. So it could be something like that. So anyway, that's sort of what periodization is going to look like. There's really no perfect version of periodization. Nothing's better than anything else. You know, we just need to kind of look at like what stuff is like most effective versus like some things that are like popularized that aren't as effective. You can do anything, like that is possible, but we will kind of talk about like what sort of works the best, you know. And then we'll have our last day. Our last day will be review and final exam, and that'll be a big celebratory day. We'll be sending folks off into the land of Capstone, where they will become traitors to the cause and join Mo's class. And yeah, that'll be where we're headed. Do you guys have any questions on how this class works?
Do I need to pick up a book for this specific class?
Yeah, I'm curious how the book thing is going to work. I'm not sure if we're doing deliveries again for some folks, or if we're doing pickups. But yeah, I'm going to let you know. It'll probably come around by like the beginning of you know, next week. Is when we'll have everything kind of scheduled out while we do like our intro stuff here.
Will I need the book for homework 1 or?
Oh no, I wouldn't say so. Definitely not.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. Oops. No. Come on. Actually, not.
So for this class, we are getting a new book for this class.
Yeah. So this is going to be a specific textbook. This is going to be. This is actually the only example of like a lot of the program design classes are taught out of like packets because NASM doesn't actually make textbook versions of those smaller certifications.
Okay.
So like, you know, the senior class is like this PDF book that we usually print for you guys. So I call it a packet class because it's like you have a packet, but you don't have a real book. The same thing is true for like weight loss, and the same thing is true for the youth mod. But this one is one that actually NASM, you know, has like a physical book for. So we'll get like a real textbook.
Okay.
We just need to set up like how we're gonna have people pick those things up safely, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so PFT 102, OPT for sports specific training. So we are looking at PowerPoint. Well, this is our day 1. Now we'll just do PowerPoint 1. I gotta open the darn PowerPoint. All right. And this is essentials of integrated training. Oh, I'm so excited. I love this class. Although this first one is first PowerPoint's kind of silly. Also, mostly because it has like a lot of definitions that come up again later anyways. Let's see how many things I remember to not put in your notes. That's actually the key here, is to not put them in your notes too early. All right, so what we need to do is we need to kind of understand like the idea of integrated training principles, right? So like obviously anytime somebody is instructing somebody else like how to work out, we would call that training, you know? But there's a difference between like just being kind of your basic trainer that like makes somebody work out and burn some calories in, you know, a somewhat effective way versus being like a trainer who sets up like a really great integrated training program. So we're going to kind of describe that and what that means. Like how do we have those components and stuff. So starting with our big definition right off the top here is integrated training is going to be a comprehensive approach that attempts to improve all components necessary for an athlete, oh my God, to perform at the highest level and prevent injury. So what we're talking about here is like when you're writing a training program, you are not just focusing on the bench press every day, you know, which is like every guy's favorite thing to do, right? It's like, I'm going to work on my chest because it looks really good. And then next day I'm going to work on my chest because it looks really good, you know. Like it's like people tend to get like stuck working on like their one kind of thing, right? It's a very like common thing. I definitely know that I've fallen into that trap a few times where I work on my vanity muscles, but you know, don't always get like as integrated as I possibly could be about things. So you know, when we say integrated training, what we're talking about is it's comprehensive. It involves like all parts of athleticism, right? It works on your core, your balance, your reactive ability, while also working on like strength training, the body parts that, yeah, are your kind of vanity muscles, right? But it's also going to be systematic, right? It is systematic in the sense that it is going to move through a system where you're going to build the foundation first before going to those more advanced styles of training. You know, we are notorious as people for wanting to like jump forward and get straight to the stuff we kind of want to work on, you know? Yeah, I remember my parents like trying to teach me how to drive, and I was like really eager. I was like, when do I get to go out on the road? Like, when do I get to like drive around people? And it's like, why are you so eager to drive around people? Like, just stay in this parking lot and, you know, get used to doing things. And my parents taught me how to park before they taught me how to drive. And I was like, this sucks. When do I get to go 100 miles an hour, you know? You want to make sure it's systematic. You want to start with the basics first and then kind of work your way from there. And it will also obviously develop a high level of athlete, right? If we are focusing on integrated training, our athletes are going to be able to perform at a very, very high level, while also, thanks to that systematic approach, preventing injury, right? It's going to help us, you know, not jump too far forward and like actually injure somebody. So we're kind of just going to copy this slide word for word here, but integrated, I'll simplify it. Integrated training is comprehensive, systematic, develops high-level athlete, and prevents injury. So those are really the things we're talking about versus oh shoot, god dang it, never mind. I had the wrong slide coming up next. So integrated training is going to focus on what we call functional strength. I forgot about this part. So functional strength is really, you're going to notice, like, it draws a lot of parallels to the idea of developing power, which obviously, like, since this is the athlete book, like this is the sports performance book, you know, power is going to be a super big part of our conversation a lot. In this mod, right? Like we've talked about like stabilization being incredibly important, and that is going to continue being important no matter who you're training. But particularly when you're training athletes, like most sports rely on, you know, two people are both trying to do the same thing. Whichever person does it faster, that's generally like the way to win a lot of athletics. So, you know, a lot of times when you get somebody who's like kind of focusing on power, I think this is a common mistake people make when they're trying to learn how to dunk. They like spend all day like, you know, working on just like jumping as fast as they can, like super explosively. And that's great at all. Like you're focusing on the acceleration part of power there. But a lot of times people don't put enough emphasis on the decelerating part of power. Right? Like the eccentric stretching that takes place before you jump makes you jump higher. And so that force reduction deceleration moment is huge. So that's a lot of like functional strength. Not to mention there's also the stabilizing that has to happen in between eccentric and concentric, even if you're like, you know, doing the initial jump, but also like when you're landing, you know, like when you land, you are now decelerating again, and then you're going to come back to standing. If you can't stabilize properly between those two phases, you're going to have a really bad time. So we are focusing on integrated or functional strength, right? And the other thing is it's also multi-planar. A lot of people like learn how to get really strong in the sagittal plane, and then they don't focus on, you know, getting strong in basically all planes of motion. So it's like, you know, you might be good at moving front to back, like walking, you know, like sagittal motions, but then like twisting to get out of the car, somebody all of a sudden somebody throws their back out, you know, with something as simple as that. So that's really what we're talking about, the difference between like integrative versus traditional training there. And it's also going to focus on it's also going to focus on neuromuscular efficiency, right? So neuromuscular efficiency, one of our other key terms that we are going to see a lot throughout this course, is the ability of the nervous system to coordinate muscle groups during activity. Another way to put this, neuromuscular efficiency is recruiting the right muscle at the right time for the right amount of force in the right plane of motion, right? Right? So it's using the correct muscles the way that you are supposed to use them for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, versus moving in a way that's kind of compromised. And yeah, you got the job done, but your body's not really designed to move that way. And so like you're putting your, you know, undue stress in different parts of your body, which could eventually lead to like a breakdown or injury. Like, let's say like I need to pick something up for my toolbox here. You know, I should be able to bend my knees and hinge at the waist and like reach down and grab this. And I know that was really awkward looking because it's like I'm doing it so specifically, but like, you know, that's I should be able to kind of make that hinging motion. But let's say like I've got really tight muscles that are keeping me from moving the way I want to. And so I just kind of lean down and like get something like that, or like do a weird twisting motion. It's like, yeah, I got the job done. Like I picked up the thing I need to pick up, but like I moved in such a way that my body's not really designed, you know? I'm putting more stress on maybe stabilizer muscles or more stress on like little synergist muscles rather than my prime movers, which should be doing most of the work. And so that can lead to my bones moving away that they're not designed, which could put undue stress on certain ligaments, which could cause an injury. So that's integrated training, right? It is comprehensive, it's systematic, develops a high level of athlete, prevents injury. It doesn't just focus primarily on one plane of motion, it focuses on many, versus traditional strength training, right? So actually, I guess I know I kind of skipped through them, but I guess I'll just briefly put some things down here. So it focuses on functional strength, all muscle actions, such as concentric strength, eccentric strength, and isometric strength. And it is also multi-planar in nature, right? It's going to focus on the sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes. And then it also focuses on neuromuscular efficiency, right? Which is recruiting the right muscles at the right time for the right amount of force in the right plane of motion. Versus traditional strength training programs. These are your basic programs, right? These are programs that, you know, I'm not saying these aren't necessarily effective. I actually like a traditional strength training program. I'm excited when somebody says they've been working out, even if they haven't ever had a trainer or taken an advanced approach to training before. I'm still excited about that. This is kind of like group exercise. You guys have heard me say this before, but there's merit in group exercise. Like the downfall of group exercise is the fact that like it's not very specific. You know, somebody created like a program and now you're going through it. And that program could, you know, 20 of those exercises could be really great for you, but those initial 5 actually might be working on something that you're already too good at. You know, you might have overactive muscles that are getting strengthened in this group exercise class. But at the same time, like your posture is probably improving in other ways. You're burning lots of calories. You're getting a good workout in. You know, I don't fully hate traditional strength training programs, but I don't think it has any place in the personal training environment. Personal training is, I mean, I don't know, personal. It is literally catered specifically to whatever it is you need to focus on, rather than just being really general. So some of the characteristics of traditional strength training programs that we want to avoid are what we're going to see here. So traditional strength training programs is simplified or basic training that has that lacks the specificity of an integrated program. So this is where you generally hear somebody who's like, you know, they picked up a magazine that's going to help them work out and they start hitting the gym. Again, I really actually like that a lot of times. I think that there is totally merit in that. I would rather somebody do that than not exercise at all. But we are going to talk about like the downfalls here. Why are you? There we go. So generally, a lot of like traditional programs only focus on maximal strength gains. You know, a lot of people like just focus on lifting as heavy as they can, rather than like focusing on good form and like learning how to move or developing endurance or power. They kind of just focus on being able to like get their numbers up. Like, how much can you bench, bro? You know, a lot of times they also utilize isolated muscle groups. Isolated muscle groups, such as prime movers, right? Again, I love the squat, I love the deadlift, I love the bench press, the military press. I love all those max strength movements. They're great, but you know, working on a military press doesn't really do that much for stabilizing your rotator cuff. You know, it's very much focusing on prime mover strength. You know, I love like a good heavy barbell squat, but it doesn't have like a lot of stabilization built into it. So if you have like some structural habits that are not so great, going into something like that could put you at further risk. They also typically tend to be uniplanar. Primarily train in the sagittal plane. I usually like to take a moment in class to go around and like, at this point, like you guys are all, you guys have all been here for a while, so you wouldn't fall for this, but I love to go around class. I'll be like, everybody name an exercise, and I'll go, you name one, and I'll just go down the class. And usually out of an entire class of, let's say like 25, 30 people, I will get like one or maybe two frontal or transverse movements. Like it'll be like crunches, barbell squat, lunges, you know, like boom, 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 sagittal, 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 sagittal. It's just very common, you know, they're the first exercises that kind of pop into our heads. And that's fine, you know, I have nothing against sagittal movements, but I do have something against only training in sagittal movements. Because again, like what happens the day you have to get out of the car and twist? You know, what happens the day you have to step to the side during traffic? You know, you don't want to sprain your ankle as you kind of, or roll your ankle as you step to the side. A lot of traditional strength training programs you're going to find are typically very uniplanar. And then a lot of times they also often focus on concentric muscle actions. A lot of times traditional programs, you see somebody in the gym and they're like, and then they just drop it, right? They're like, yeah, I did it, you know, and they bail with their barbell. You know, that's a lot of concentric strength. You're not really focusing on eccentric, you know? So the problem with traditional strength training programs is it's not very functional, right? It's not multiplanar, and it doesn't really focus on the entire muscle action spectrum. You know, your muscles don't just concentrically contract, they also eccentrically contract and isometrically stabilize. We want to train somebody to be able to do all of those things. So this is where, this is the one. This is the one. I'm not going to put this in your notes today because I know it's going to show up in a bit. So this is where we start really talking about stretch shortening cycles, which luckily for you guys, we have talked about plenty of times, right? Like this is a concept that I actually really like to talk about. I think it's fascinating, and I also think that it's like really important to you know, train athletes. But what a stretch shortening cycle is it's an active stretch caused by an eccentric contraction, right, of a muscle, followed by an immediate shortening, to be a concentric contraction, of the same muscle. So basically, when you overstretch a muscle, your nervous system freaks out for a second because it thinks that that muscle is going to get stretched even further and eventually like tear, right? Your muscle spindles, whose job it is to sense the length of your muscle, send a signal to the brain that goes, whoa, too long, too fast, pull back the other way, you know? Kind of freaks out. And so what happens is then that muscle actually contracts. And when it contracts, that, you know, shortens the muscle, which is exactly what the muscle wants, right? It wants to be in a shortened state where it's protective. It can't, you know, my bicep can't tear when it's bent like this. It's already like bunched up. So there's plenty of like grip. It doesn't have to worry about like overstretching. So that is where you have like a stretch shortening cycle. The muscle wants to be kind of bunched up where it's very safe. So if you overstretch it really quickly, it's going to want to bounce back in the opposite direction as quickly as it can. Now we as athletes can take advantage of that principle by applying stretch shortening cycles, you know, rather than just trying to jump like that. If we throw our arms down, we're going to naturally want to spring back in the opposite direction because I stretched my muscles. Now they're going to want to shorten in the opposite way. So we call that a stretch reflex. That's actually caused by your nervous system. And it's a reflex because it actually isn't even part of your conscious brain's decision making. This is ironic, but Maggie, we were talking about thinking fast versus thinking slow. This is an example of that on an even smaller level. This is like your full-on nervous system. Like that book's all about like psyche. This is actually a physical thing. So a reflex, guys, is where something is so intense that it doesn't even travel to the brain. The signal is so intense that, you know, it might come from like an effector site. You know, let's say it is my bicep, right? And it'll travel and it gets to my spine rather than traveling up to my brain for my brain to go, it's really stretched out. The most appropriate action would be to shorten the muscle. You know, your brain's kind of the thinker of the group. It's not always the fastest thing in the world. So what ends up happening is it just gets to your spine, and your spine is like, executive decision, pull back the other way. It's like a floor manager walking around a factory. You know, floor managers in charge of like making sure everybody's doing their job. They don't make a lot of decisions though. Like decisions are made by the CEO of the company. But if there's a garbage can on fire on the factory floor and there's a fire extinguisher right there, that person's not going to go to the CEO and be like, excuse me, sir, do you want me to put the fire out downstairs? Right? Like they're going to make that decision, like there's a fire, and then they're going to make a decision on the spot. That is kind of what stretch reflexes are like. It is where something is so intense that your it actually travels to here and then goes right back in the opposite direction. The problem with reflexes is that they are often very simple rather than like involving your fine motor movements. You've experienced this a million times whenever anybody's been like, you know, popped out behind a wall and like scare you or be like, you know, and you do that thing where you're like, you know, your arms just kind of fly up. Like, you know, you don't really have like a lot of conscious control. You're just kind of making a really quick reflex reaction. If you're the type of person who has like a punch reflex, you know, your friend is probably going to get one in the face. That is a simple reflex. Your brain didn't have time to like consider all the options. It just did something really quickly. So that's a stretch shortening cycle. They're super simple, but they're super, super, super fast. And that's the real key here. You're going to store any potential energy. You're not going to lose that potential energy by holding your isometric for very long. what you want to do is you want to make the transition time between lengthening and shortening as fast as possible. If that transition time is really fast, you're not going to lose any energy letting it sit around, right? It is going to simply like get right into the explosive part of the movement. And so it's also going to train for explosive force. You're going to be able to do more work in a shorter time period, and it will increase your force production without experiencing hypertrophy, which could be a good or a bad thing depending on what your goals are. But you guys have heard me say this before. This is why training for power, like if you look at all 5 phases of the OPT, the phase that is worse for building muscle, like size-wise, is the power phase. Because explosive stuff just doesn't have enough time under tension. However, you will get stronger. So if you want to get stronger without getting larger, maybe of like a specific weight class or something like that, that's where power training becomes like one of your best friends. So that's one part of integrated training. We're going to focus on that. We're also going to utilize an integrated training principle, right? We're going to utilize the entire training continuum, which means we are, going for the greatest overall training response here. We want to use functional movement patterns. This is where you guys have probably heard me say this before, but like one of my least favorite exercises that exists is the cable crunch. I think that is an incredibly silly exercise. If you are going for functionality, if you're going for like big blocky abs and you want your abs to pop, actually that's great. I'm a big fan. Go for it. Bodybuilders, cable crunch, it's your best friend. But if you're going for like, I see athletes doing it all the time. Athletes who are trying to work on like having a strong core, and it's like, the thing about the cable crunch is like it's just not a very functional movement. Like when in nature are you going to need to grab like a rope or something or any other type of weight and like pull it like this? Like if you need to get something from here over to here, you're gonna grab it and like use your entire body, right? It's just not a very functional movement. So integrated training is going to focus on the more functional movements. We're also going to target muscle synergies. We're going to focus on like working muscles together the way they're designed to work together. I'm not just going to strengthen my anterior or medial deltoid. I'm going to get all of my deltoids and my rotator cuff, and I'm going to stabilize my scapula the entire time, right? So I'm focusing on like, rather than just traditionally doing like shoulder presses, I'm doing external rotations, I'm doing like pulls, I'm doing a lot of things to focus on like stabilizing that entire shoulder girdle rather than just moving the shoulder joint. And then high levels of all components of training. Again, I'm focusing on, this is where we look at the OPT model. I'm focusing on stabilization, endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and power. I'm doing all of those things rather than just one or two of them. So integrated training, you want to move in all those planes of motion, right? Sagittal, frontal, transverse. You want to use athletic movements in all of those planes. So movements that often like mirror whatever sport it is you are applying it to. Again, this is the thing. I remember I kind of poked fun at this chapter a little bit before we got started today. They repeat themselves a lot in this first chapter. They're like, NASM good, traditional bad. NASM good, traditional bad, like over and over and over again. But yeah, traditional programs are typically sagittal, but most injuries take place in the frontal and the transverse planes. It's somebody stepping to the side and then rolling their ankle. They're not so good at having flexibility in this plane of motion here. So what ends up happening, if they're already like this ligament is just used to being in a shortened state. So then all of a sudden, as they try to go this way, it can't lengthen out properly. And so then it tears, and that's how you sprain your ankle. Lateral ankle sprains, by the way, it is a test question somewhere in this course, the most common sports-related injury. And then transverse, you always hear, like my mom broke her spine. Like that's how my mom broke her back, was when she was like working at a pet store and a customer purchased something. She turned around to grab like a plastic bag and broke 4 of her vertebrae, pop, pop, pop. Pop for 4. That was a transverse movement. not that she had trained in the sagittal plane beforehand, but she had moved through the sagittal plane most of the time. So reviewing our planes of motion real quick, right? We've got the frontal, the sagittal, and the transverse planes. We want to get good at, not just this, but also this and that. We want to be able to rotate as well. So another integrated training principle is that we will always train with proper posture. We don't just want to get the job done. This is where somebody accused me of hating Jeff Cavalier, like the Athlete X guy. That's not wholly true. I think that he has a lot of really great videos. And his variations on exercises, I think, are also super, super fun. I think he comes up with some really cool variations that can target things stability wise. And I think he's also a great teacher and very smart. He has one fatal flaw that kind of drives me a little crazy, where he is somewhat a fan of like cheat reps, where it's like if you've plateaued on an exercise and, like let's say you're doing like a seated row, right? Like you should be using your scapula to move that movement. But at some point, if you've just been trying to like go up on the weight and it's just not happening, and then all of a sudden you want to like, maybe do a little lean. He's like, he has like a take on that where it's like that little bit of form break is maybe just enough to train your nervous system to deal with a heavier weight so that it doesn't get bullied by that heavy weight. And now like your brain knows how to do it. You can go back to good form. And you broke your plateau and now you can do the heavier weight. I think that actually is like a fair enough training principle. Mo and I had a really good conversation about this once, which is like, there is a difference between there's a difference in training with good form and putting yourself at risk, and training with good form and training with bad form and putting yourself at risk versus training with bad form in such a way that really isn't going to hurt you, So there's kind of merit there in that. There is merit in a little bit of cheating every now and then because it can. But like, if you're doing that consistently, you're not really doing the movement. This is where the debate comes down to like, sometimes people give kipping pull-ups a lot of crap. They're like, kipping pull-ups, that's you're swinging your whole body to do your pull-up. That doesn't count. And it's like, it may not be a pull-up in the traditional sense, but it's still a motion that strengthens like the explosive power of your lats and lower traps and stuff. It's still an exercise. It might give you bad regular pull-up habits, so you need to make sure that you're aware of that and train for that. But it doesn't mean that it's not like a legit exercise. So, that's my take on it. Like we do want to, although that's my take on it, your textbook, and the thing to remember is that it's like good form, always, always train with proper posture. I think we just lost Frankie. I think he might have accidentally hung up. You could tell he accidentally unmuted himself, and then I think he accidentally hit the uncall button. And there he is. All right. Wait for it. And welcome back, Frankie.
Yeah. Okay. I was just about to say something too, like about how that, like how you say it's just like to cheat a little bit, like I feel like that even when like for the simplest thing like a bicep curl, like when you're trying to go up in weight and you just can't have that finish, I always feel like that little bit of swing eventually helps you get to that stronger sets.
Right. And
like,
so then you just ask yourself,
rep.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I was saying don't swing every single rep, but like when you're trying to finish and you have to use that little bit of momentum, like even just to do a bicep curl, let's say you get that little tiny swing going.
Yeah.
I feel like it still helps you get to the next level.
Right. It might be that thing that breaks your plateau,
Yeah.
And a little bit of swing on a bicep curl isn't really dangerous. But it's like when you start, I think like the mistake a lot of people make is they take that principle and then they take it too far, and it's like, well, now I'm gonna start cheating on other exercises like like a barbell squat. That is not really
Yeah.
an exercise you want to cheat on. Like you got a lot of
Or
weight on your spine and hips right here. Could
yeah.
not, might not be safe for everybody. So I have nothing against like when it's used every now and then, and if it's safe. And that's kind of where Mo and I were getting kind of deeper about it, is we were talking about like, the difference between training with proper form, or training with improper form leading to like an in-functional training response versus training with improper form as a way of like, still being functional and progressing. If it's dangerous, don't ever cheat.
Yeah.
But if you can do it safely, well, you can use it to kind of break a plateau, but then at the same time, like, don't fall into the habit of doing it every time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, integrated training principles: always train with proper posture, and then always train for optimal muscle balance. Always train for like a good length tension relationship. Again, this is another concept I'm not going to put in your notes now because I know that it shows up later. But remember, our muscles sit at an ideal resting length, right? It's the length at which our muscles can generate the maximal amount of tension. We want to address that through integrated training. We want to look at someone's overactive muscles, we want to look at somebody's overactive muscles, and we want to basically, turn the overactive stuff off, turn the underactive stuff on. That is our main goal. And that is very much an integrated principle. Whereas in a traditional strength training program would focus on just strengthening the body. But if they're not taking the time to address those underactive muscles, that's going to lead to muscle imbalances. And those muscle imbalances are caused by primarily these two things here, right? So basically you have a shortened muscle, which is caused by like an overactive agonist, and that is decreasing the neural drive of its antagonist. Again, this is like the Joker pulling too hard and Batman can't do his job, right? That's not something we want to have happen, right? So that's a term that we call altered reciprocal inhibition. A tight agonist decreases the neural drive of its antagonist. Good example of that are like, if your hamstrings are super tight and you lose strength on like a knee extension movement, right? Your hamstrings are primarily in charge of knee flexion. Knee extension is then decreased. So then you lose quad strength, which could result in, decreased stabilization of the knee, or it could lead to, improper form during a movement. So a lot of times what ends up happening when that agonist can't do his job, like here's the classic example, and I think the one that they're going to use here, are overactive hip flexors, which decrease the neural drive of your hip extension, right? You are too good at this and you struggle with that, right? Now your hips can't extend properly, so your glutes have been turned off. That can often lead to, what's that?
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that can often lead to synergistic dominance. If my glutes can't do hip extension, maybe my hamstrings or my low back will try. And so then I start arching, right? So that's synergistic dominance, right? Your synergist muscles start taking over. Batman can't get the job done, the Robin's going to step in and do it for him. So integrated training principles are going to sort of work against that paradigm. And they also always train for like optimal muscle function. Here we go. Yeah. So for example, if you're trying to strengthen the gluteus maximus, you're going to use concentric, eccentric, and isometric movements. You're going to use all three muscle actions. You're going to strengthen it in the sagittal plane through hip extension, the frontal plane through hip abduction, and the transverse plane through hip external rotation. And you're going to use different modalities. You're going to use Bosu balls and the floor, being stable if you're focusing on strength. You're going to do it on an RX pad, you're going to do it on a Dynadisc. So you're going to use different modalities in order to kind of introduce all the different ways to like be athletic. So integrated training programs also focus on all of our types of athleticism. You guys have heard me describe like the movement prep section, that core, balance, reactive. Sometimes new students who are like learning program design for the first time, they get really confused by when they're like, So, you know, there's core strength, core stabilization, and core power exercises. There's balance strength, balance stabilization, balance power. And then we get into the body parts where like chest strength, chest stabilization, chest power. And they're like, why are those two like different sections? And it's like, you kind of want to think of like the resistance section as where you train body parts. And you want to think of the movement prep section as the part where you train types of athleticism, you know, or components of athleticism. Like components of athleticism are core stabilization, balance, and power, right? Those are the three kind of components to make an effective athletic body versus like strong glutes, strong shoulder muscles, you know, strong chest, whatever. So it's a little bit of a different like concept there, right? The resistance, the meat and potatoes is where we train body parts, but the way we address our athleticism is in the movement prep. And so the components of an integrated training program are going to be your warm up, which is your flexibility training, right? We're going to address poor flexibility and muscle imbalances. Cardiorespiratory training, obviously very important. That's going to help us minimize our risk for overtraining by giving our body, by flushing our body, you know, I hate to use the word toxins because it's like my least favorite thing ever. But we don't leave lactic acid just laying around, which is very acidic, or if you want to use the word toxic, go for it, and leads you to being very sore. So that can like decrease performance, but also like put you at risk for injury because then you move in a compromised way. So cardiorespiratory training is really important for that, not to mention all the benefits of just having a good cardiovascular system. Core training, right? Stabilizing the spine, moving the spine quickly. Balance training, balancing your entire like body from top to bottom. You know, the one thing that I think NASM like misses out on is they do not talk about the importance of, like, they apply it a lot, but they don't talk about it enough, is like the importance of foot strength. Like they do all this stuff that makes your feet way stronger, like through balance training, you know? Your balance is primarily located in three places: the bottom of your foot, your core, and then like your inner ear, which we can't really do much for. You know, I'm not doing like ear reps. But like those are kind of the three primary spots we have balance. You train for those things when you're standing on one leg, you know? My foot's gripping the ground, my core is stabilizing, and my ear is learning, like, you know, when I'm level and when I'm not. So, you know, we do apply that in sort of this one big concept called balance training, right? Which is obviously very, very important. And then plyometric training, we are learning how to utilize those stretch shortening cycles to be as effective as possible. We get, you know, as much work done in as short a time as possible. Box jumps, squat jumps, single leg hops, things like that. And then we have speed, agility, and quickness training. We are not just getting to the gym and doing chest day, you know, or leg day with our athletic clients. You know, we aren't just focusing on one type of training. We're focusing on all of it. We're focusing on the speed, agility, and quickness side of things as well. A lot of people tend to just jump into the gym and they focus on like learning how to run faster, and that's great. But learning how to like accelerate and decelerate properly, learning how to change directions, and then learning how to like react to changes in your environment. All of those things are a big concept of athleticism as well. And so that makes it an integrated program versus a traditional one. So that is sort of what we're talking about there. And obviously we're going to apply all this stuff later in your textbook when we get into the actual program design. But for now, like, we kind of know all the components that we're moving into. So no matter what your goal is, we can apply integrated training, right? If it's to prevent injury, decrease body fat, or increase lean muscle mass, which are our primary like three goals in this program design class, right? Like those are all the athlete goals. Obviously other goals are out there, but like we do know that an integrated training approach can address all of those things. So above all, the most important thing is to make sure that it is safe. You choose the right exercises to sort of meet that integrated criteria. You systematically progress and adapt things, and you always, always, always focus on quality over quantity. Any questions about chapter 1? How are you feeling, guys?
Yeah, solid.
Cool. Like I said, it's like a big, it's like it's like in a lot of
Intro.
ways it's silly stuff, but it is a
Yeah.
big intro, right?
Yeah.
So now we're going to kind of dive right back into some stuff that we have talked about before, but it's a much watered down version. I'm not going to try to reteach you kinesiology, over 12 days again. So it's going to be a much more watered down version. But this is our introduction, is what they call it. Not for us, but to human movement science. So that button, and then I need to, how do I normally do this? I gotta end the recording and then start the recording up again. So 1 second here. We'll see you for video 2.